Hello, Fathers Faithful. Thank you for joining me for Sunday School today. Well, actually, I'm just going to do a short devotion. It's been a hectic week, and I ask for prayers for my mother. She is in the hospital, and I'm on my way to the hospital in a little while to check on her. So if you will please pray for Miss Shirley Tobin, I would appreciate that. I wrote this column in 2018, and I think that I would just like to share this with you today. So, my husband and I had just left the funeral home. We decided to stop at the store on our way home. We were walking down the aisle side by side when the voice of a man pushing a shopping cart stopped us. "Excuse me," he said, getting our attention. "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" I knew what my husband must be thinking. "I don't know what it is about you that makes people want to talk to you," he tells me all the time. "But you must have this face, this something about you that feels safe, something that makes people want to tell you their life stories." So although we were a bit startled by the man's approach, neither of us were surprised that he wanted to talk. In fact, I was quick to reply before my husband could speak. "We don't mind at all," I answered. After a moment, the stranger asked, "How long have you two been married?" Now, that question I had not expected. I glanced over at my husband before I replied. "Almost 40 years, I answered. Even as the words left my lips and sounded on my ears, it was hard for me to believe that I was hearing my own words. 40 years? Had it really been that long? However, the man didn't miss a beat. I knew it, he declared. "I can see it. You take care of each other. I knew it had to be a long time. You've been good to her." He looked at my husband in the eyes before turning back to me. "And you've taken care of him," he continued. "My uncle did the same thing. He took care of my aunt. She never paid a bill in her life, and he made sure that when he died, she was taken care of." He was still talking when a woman walked up and grabbed him by his arm. "Come on," she said curtly. "I'm ready to get out of here." As I mentioned, we had just left the funeral home. We had stopped by to pay our respects to my cousin's husband, a man that we had known and loved for many years. He had married into my extended family several years before my husband and I met. In fact, his 40-something-year-old son had been the ring bearer in our own wedding. It was a sad goodbye to a man who was quick to enjoy life with a smile and a hearty chuckle every time we saw him. The past 2 months had been a roller coaster ride for him and his family, including surgeries and intensive care and tiny glimpses of hope, only to be dashed in the last days with the realization that his earthly life was coming to an end. When I took my cousin's hands into mine that night, I couldn't help but be brokenhearted for her. She had hardly left her husband's side for 2 long months. Not only was she grieving, but she was physically exhausted. I remember distinctly standing in the vestibule of our church the day she and her husband were married. I was a young teenager, and my grandmother was waiting to be escorted into the church. "I won't be at your wedding," she had whispered to me, "but I want you to know that I am praying every day for the man who will be your husband." I remember being startled by her words and not understanding why she was telling me that. I didn't have any idea that 4 months later she would lose her battle with terminal cancer. Now my cousin was burying her husband after 47 years of marriage. My husband and I would soon be celebrating 40 years in our own marriage. And that man pushing the grocery cart, somehow he knew. Somehow he sensed a relationship that had been blessed and ordained by God and prayed over for years and years. As the Christmas season approaches, I'm reminded of another marriage ordained and blessed by God. The marriage of the earthly parents God chose to raise his son, Jesus. Joseph and Mary certainly endured hardships and heartaches even before they were married, and yet from the very beginning, Joseph chose to protect her and Mary chose to trust him. In the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, the details of the turbulent circumstances surrounding their impending marriage is explained. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. Matthew 1:18 and 19. But the story doesn't end there. Joseph chose to be obedient to God, to marry Mary, and be by her side as she gave birth to God's Son in a stable. The Bible tells us only a few details of their marriage, but through our brief encounter with Mary and Joseph, we observe their love for each other and their family. In spite of hard times, as they fled from King Herod, searched and found Jesus at the temple, all the while providing Jesus a safe, loving home in which to be raised, they loved each other. So this Christmas season, I am once again reminded of the gifts that we often take for granted, for prayers of grandmothers and examples of long, loving marriages. And this year, I am thankful for the man in the grocery store who reminded me once more of how blessed I really am. Again, there are many people on our minds and in our hearts that need our prayers today. You know who they are in your families, and I just pray that the Lord will hear our individual prayers today. I lift them up to Him and know that He is faithful and true. I hope you have a good week and a wonderful Christmas season. I'll see you next week.